Alrighty, good morning, everybody. We are letting everyone filter into the room right now, and we'll get started here in just 1 second. We have a really great guest from Massachusetts Association of Realtors that I'll introduce in just one moment, but we'll let the participant number count grow, and once it stabilizes here in a second, I will kick it to Ryan and Catherine, who will then take us through. We have the chat and we also have the Q&A. So if you have a question for us, either for Ryan or for Catherine Taylor, we will address those in the Q&A, probably when we get towards the end, or if we can answer some by typing, we'll try to do that as well. And all of us are using Wi-Fi right now, so some of us might get choppy or cut out. So if you miss anything, we'll try to recap it, and then we'll definitely try to send out a recording of this in a few days to make sure that you can go back and review all the great information that we will discuss. So we now got close to 150 of our members in here. So again, I'm Greg Kiley, president of CCIOR, CCI MLS, and your regional rep at MAR. We have with us, obviously, Ryan, who everybody recognizes, and then Catherine Taylor, who is the associate counsel and also better known as the person who answers the legal hotline at MAR, who have some really, really current relevant information to help us figure out week 3, week 4, whatever week we're in right now. All I know is someone told me it is Monday today, so we might as well get the week started right. So Ryan, off to you, and thank you, Catherine, for being here with us.
Thank you, Greg. And if you have trouble hearing, you can always use the call-in number. That will help your not use the Wi-Fi if you're having trouble with audio. As on the Cape, we all know sometimes internet is spotty, as we're trying to push for more better broadband along the Cape. We're finding the need in some of these as well. So I want to walk through a couple updates for you guys before we get started. A reminder, we have continuing education webinars every Wednesday at 1 p.m. live. Thank you for those to work through our issues last week, as we ran it on Thursday as well. We have corrected those issues from the instructor and do not foresee those again in the future. But we have extended it through May. So we have canceled all live classes through May and have extended the live webinars through every Wednesday at 1 p.m. through May. So please take a chance of that. We're adding new instructors in May for them as well. So, and as always, you have the free on-demand CEs, the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, that you can take as well. Couple things we have coming up this week. The first thing we're going to try this week and see if it works. We're not really sure, but staff had an idea of how this can work, so we're going to try it. We're going to do an Upper Cape virtual MLS tour that covers the towns of Falmouth, Mashpee, Sandwich, and Bourne, and Wareham, Wednesday of April 8th at 9 a.m. So if you have a property that hasn't made it on tour recent and all that stuff, put it on. We're going to take 15, but we're allowing more than that so we can kind of see it and get going for the next couple weeks too. We'll expand to other areas if we find this technology works and also is valuable to the members. You don't need a tour. We have an idea of how to present it to the members without needing a virtual tour. So what we'll do is just put it on the tour, and then our staff will reach out on Tuesday during the day, talk to you about your listing, figure out the best way to present it, and we can go from there. But work with us on that. We hope to have a good turnout for that as well. So the Zoom link to access that tour is inside of the Cape and Islands MLS. Doing that so that the link is completely private and you'll be able to find it. Only members of the MLS will be able to find it in the MLS tour section. We have several more other sessions this week too. We have tomorrow at 11 a.m. How to work virtually in today's real estate environment with the real estate tech guy, John Mayfield, doing a professional development webinar. And then also on Thursday at 10 a.m. we have Joe Rossi, Understanding Flood Insurance webinar. Both are for non-CE credit, but ways to improve your business. And so take a look at both of those. And then we also have 4 MLS trainings online this week, 3 in RPR and 1 in Flex MLS. So check out our calendar. We update things regularly on there. You can just filter by virtual, so you can see what's coming on virtually as we add things as well. So couple quick updates. Hopefully you all got our daily briefing this past weekend, but I just wanted to highlight these things. I know a lot of you guys are talking and asking about unemployment insurance. One of the things is, though, don't discount the SBA loans. The SBA loans may actually be more beneficial and valuable to you than unemployment, since we don't know how the unemployment rules will be written. So SBA loans, there's 2 kinds: economic injury disaster loan and payroll protection plan. On the payroll protection plan, self-employed independent contractors won't be available for application until April 10th. Small businesses can now apply. On the economic injury disaster loan, all of them can apply. You're supposed to receive a $10,000 advance within 3 days of loan acceptance, but I haven't heard back from anyone's got their 10 grand yet, so I'm just waiting to hear that before I tell you. Definitely, both of these loans, like, don't let the word loan scare you. They both can be forgivable depending on what you're using them for. So really talk to the bank that you have a existing banking relationship with. So the bank that you currently have your business account at, you should just call and talk to them about that. They have online applications. You can go ahead and fill those out. Start that process. Many of them are only doing the ones for their customers right now. So start with those banks. And remember, you're going to hear on Facebook and in other groups, everyone having a different opinion on what loan or what thing to be using. Everyone has a different financial situation. Talk to your banking representative about what's best for you. Remember, you're a real estate professional, they're banking representatives for a reason, and because they're professionals in this. So talk to them about what's best for your independent financial situation. So wanted to talk a little bit about the market, because many of you guys are asking kind of what it's doing, how it's going in light of all the changes. So this is pulled this morning for sales in March through March. So I want to just highlight them a little bit. If you see it there, basically closed sales for March were up about 11%. The dollar volume of sold listings were up 44 million, but remember, if y'all haven't seen, we had the largest residential real estate transaction in the Cape Cod and Islands ever, MLS in Barnstable County ever, closed on March 31st at $20 million. So the dollar volume at 44 is probably a little skewed on that one. And then the median sales price also up still as well. But the sold price, I mean, the number of sold listings were up significantly, so that's good. That means hopefully a lot of things still got closed, and I'll go through with a little bit of stats a little deeper in a few seconds. So last several weeks specifically, what we've seen, here's a little bit of a chart to show what we're looking at. So like I said, in sold listings still were really good for March. So even the last couple of weeks, last 3 weeks, kind of 314 on since we kind of started this whole process, and 321 since the stay-at-home order kind of went in effect, we still see a healthy number of solds. That means you're keeping a lot of the deals together you had. One thing I had staff looking at, though, is back on market, which I don't have those stats right in front of me, to see maybe how many deals fell apart and how good the solds could have been. But still, they were still there, as you saw from year to year, last year to this year in March. And then you see, obviously, the seasonality trend that we see already of how solds get better throughout the winter into the spring. But this is where you see it. You see pendings and you see new listings. This is where you'll probably see the biggest impact in the last 3 weeks, and then moving forward the next couple of weeks, when this continues, is pendings obviously have dropped almost over each week, and that's obviously as many as properties get go to offer. So as less properties are available to be shown, less people are out going to look at houses, you're going to see that pending number drop each week as far as the number that goes pending. That's not the number of pending listings, that's the number that's going pending each week. withdrawn. Obviously, we've seen a big amount of withdrawn listings when, you're just not able to show the property right now. You don't think a virtual showing's the right thing, or however else you may have an issue with, and you're just taking the property temporarily off market. That'd be withdrawn for a limited time. So hopefully those listings will come back at some point as well. And then canceled, you always have a big amount of canceled listings toward the end of the month, as you usually see. I mean, expired listings at the end of the month, as you see. Canceled that first week, we saw more people pull it off in that. And then new listings, like I said, we've seen just obviously you're getting new listings on and then drop. That's going to have a significant issue on inventory. But as long as new listings and pendings kind of stay in the same boat, on the same at least trajectory that they were, which right now they're not, right? Like, so back in early March, 3.7 through 3.13, 2.29 through 3.6, we were seeing a lot more new listings than pendings. Now we're not. So that's going to have an effect on inventory as that comes down. So just keep an eye on that. Some of the numbers we're looking at on what's making a difference. All right, so what price points are we actually seeing doing business right now? So we're seeing it, obviously, look at the last 3 weeks. So you see what's actually gone pending. So you see where buyers are still out there looking. As always, though, the under $500,000 mark is the most active mark we have. So you can see where some of that is and some of that fluctuation happens, and then the days on market it takes for those properties to get there. So just to kind of show where that market is and what price points buyers are still out there doing stuff in. Sorry, 1 second. I thought I had one more slide, but it's not coming up. So then the last thing I want to talk about was what towns, how towns are going. So what we've seen is a drop in all the towns, except for Yarmouth. Yarmouth's jumped up tremendously in the last 3 weeks. Not sure why, other than it's up about 50%. All the other towns are down significantly. Outside of Barnstable, Falmouth, Yarmouth, you really don't have enough pendings in each town to really, outside of margin of errors when you're talking about 4 versus 5 versus 7, right? So that can be really fluctuating when you get in town data. But Falmouth and Barnstable are down about in the last 3 weeks from the prior 3 weeks on pendings by 50%. Yarmouth's up 50%. So those are just some of the little data we've had from those ends. Catherine, I want to bring you in now to talk about some of the legal challenges and some of the other things that agents are facing out there right now. One is, we talked about a little bit with Teresa last week, but can you go over quickly the 2 different addendums you've put out, the COVID-19 addendum, when and how and why to use that, and then the smoke inspector addendum, when and why and how to use that?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So yes, in the last couple of weeks, MAR has created 2 new forms to help you navigate your transactions throughout the pandemic. One is the COVID-19 addendum, which is delays you might experience in your transaction as a result of, can you hear me? I lost my audio.
You're breaking up a little bit.
All right, I can hear you now. I think my computer froze.
All right, good.
Am I coming through clear now?
Now you are. Let's start from the top.
All right, we're going to start from the top. Sorry about that, guys. So we have 2 new addendum to assist you with your transactions during the pandemic. First is the COVID-19 addendum, which is going to come to play for those situations where you might delay your transactions. So the situations are going to be not working.
Yeah, we lost you again, Catherine.
You lost me.
You're breaking
again?
up again. Yeah. Can you call in?
Yeah, let me see if I can call in. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on here.
Every time you talk like this, you're crystal clear, and then when you get into explain things, you break up again. So.
All right, I'm going to try calling in. Bear with me just 1 second.
All right.
So Ryan, I'll just, Richard Waystack had a really great question about, the different pending data that you have, and whether it includes contingent and which of the two categories of contingent you include in that.
Great question. So we consider active as active and contingent showings allowed, because showings are allowed is an active status. Contingent no showings is considered a pending status. So when we talk pendings, we say it's contingent no showings and it's pending on statuses. But great question there to explain when we talk data. Is there any other questions to look at?
Yeah, Greg? I think Richard asked if there's a way in the future to break out those stats, or if we can maybe send out some more information on doing hot sheets. Maybe that's a lunch and learn or something that we can have staff work on, so that people can get better adept at doing their own hot sheets based on. I think one of the tough things you just mentioned is there are certain communities that have critical mass still, and there are certain communities that just it's trickled down to fewer sales, and it's harder to do a hot sheet.
Right, obviously, because if you look at some towns, they have very little activity already, especially this time of year, and then you're depressing that activity a little bit more even. So at times you can get there. So Catherine.
I need you to unmute me.
You are. We can hear you. Not now, we can hear you before.
Yeah, we'll need to unmute her on the phone because she's now called in as a phone person.
Okay.
So we'll work on that. So Ryan, there's also a question about what stats do we have for Martha's Vineyard MLS, if we've been able to pull out stats on the Vineyard.
We haven't really taken a look at those as we have only about 70% market share right now out there. So we're waiting, obviously don't really have the great data out there to be looking at how the market's doing out there. And comfortable releasing a lot of those stats.
Sure. And so if anyone else has any questions about market stats or any of the updates that Ryan gave us, now's a great time. We're going to work through the technology.
Yeah, on the unemployment insurance, a quick update. Like so what essentially you heard last week is what we're still waiting on. The Department of Labor has to write regulations, and then the state unemployment division has to actually implement the regulations. And Governor Baker talked a lot about this at one of his press conferences last week. It's actually one time you're really happy you have a really wonky governor in this kind of situation, right? That never in the history of Massachusetts or the federal government had they ever given independent contractors the ability to file for unemployment. So the regulations have to start from scratch. So they're kind of like trying to build the car as they're driving it. So that's what's taking forever on those regulations on the unemployment insurance side. That's the SBA programs, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the EIDL. That was already an existing program. So those regulations were able to be released, and the loan applications made available quicker. That PPP, the Payment Protection Plan, didn't have an application or a program, and as such, they had to recreate that. They had to create that from the start. And banks were then taking a while to get those guidelines to then put their stuff out. I know a lot of people reached out Thursday, Fridays trying to apply at their local bank, and they said, no, we're not doing yet. I continue that reach out with them. Do we have Catherine yet?
So Catherine, if you could just send Marissa your direct phone number, she'll get you a presenter phone call set up for that. There are two more questions in here, Ryan, that I think maybe you can touch on right now. Any updates to the possibility of virtual notarizations, or where do we think that stands right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to happen at the state level. I know the state legislature is moving some things along those lines. I'll be honest, a lot of the problems you run into are that as closing attorneys, starting to think that we're moving into their business, like they could become less relevant. I don't think that's true. I just think it's going to make the process smoother. I will say this. I think that what we've seen from real estate brokerages, agents themselves, lenders, and closing attorneys in the last 3 weeks on moving the technology bar is going to make us so much better for the future, and we'll have revitalized and changed the way buyers and sellers will work, have that home buying process change forever based on the technology that everyone's been able to implement over the last 3 weeks. So Catherine, are you there now?
I should be here. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. So take it off with the
Awesome.
2 addendums and we'll get going there.
All right. Sorry about that. A little bit of a learning curve over here. So in the last couple of weeks, MAR has developed 2 new forms to assist our members with navigating their transactions through the pandemic. The first one is, we've called it the COVID-19 addendum, which is to be used as an addendum to your purchase contract that's going to allow you to have an extension of time if for whatever reason your transaction is delayed as a result of some COVID-19 reason. So if you can't get to the registry, for example, if it's closed, it allows you to extend the time for performance under the contract as a result. If a party to the transaction is under quarantine, situations like that that are really directly related to the current pandemic, this addendum is going to allow it so it's not otherwise considered a breach of the contract. The other form that we've created is an addendum that addresses the smoke and carbon monoxide inspections that the majority of our municipalities are not conducting at this time. So this addenda allows a transaction to close without having that inspection certificate, which is otherwise required, but it puts the burden on the buyer to, within 90 days of the end of the pandemic, that they need to have that smoke inspection completed. That's going to be done. The burden is theirs to make sure that that gets done. That addendum is then provided to the fire department where the property is located, so they have a way to follow up and make sure that is actually completed. If the parties want to, there's some negotiating that can happen with that with regard to holdbacks for covering the cost of updating the smoke and carbon detectors, or something along those lines. But really, it just shifts that burden from the seller to the buyer, and it allows that transaction to close. All right.
Catherine, on that note, what are the things to be working with on your buyer side? Like, are there things to be talking about with your buyers on the smoke addendums that, listing agents can say, hey, here's the addendum, it's deferred. There's other things to factor in if you're representing a buyer from your responsibility, right?
Right. So you definitely want to be having a conversation with your buyer about what that liability shift means and whether they want to be negotiating for any expense to have those detectors updated if that's required, the expense of the inspection. You can always have a holdback for that. But you want to be talking to your buyers about what this means, how this is different from a typical transaction where it's the seller's responsibility. Most of you, I would imagine, have a fairly comfortable position as far as when you look at a house, whether those detectors may or may not need to be updated. So you can help guide your client and say, look on HomeDepot.com and see what, an anticipated cost of these might be if they have to be upgraded, or, you bring your experience into the conversation as well.
Should, as a listing agent, should you still be doing the normal preparations with your seller for smoke inspection that you normally would have done if you still had to have it before the sale?
Yeah, I think you should. I don't think that the seller should just sort of ignore it and pretend like it doesn't exist, but to, I would go through the normal steps that you would typically go through.
All right, and then what about consequences if it's not done within 90 days from the buyer side?
It's the enforcement of the local fire department. I'm not sure exactly what, if there's a fine associated with it potentially, but it's the enforcement is up to the municipality.
All right, and should the addendums, if you have a COVID-related, need the COVID-related addendum or the smoke addendum, should you be doing that with purchase and sale? Should you be doing that with the offer? Should you do it after you get a purchase and sale? When should you be talking about those?
I would, given the current state of affairs, I would do it sooner rather than later in a transaction. I would probably attach it to an offer if you're using a binding offer. I know not everybody does. I think you mostly do down on the case, but it should be with your first binding contract that you have.
Okay. All right. And then, so let's move on to what we hear a lot. I'm hearing a lot, and you're hearing a lot on the legal hotline about brokerages that have created their own addendums. They're asking questionnaires about buyers before sellers will let them in the house. What are some of the scenarios you're hearing out there, and what's your advice on a lot of these?
Sure. I've gotten a lot of questions about brokerage developed forms. Obviously, if your brokerage is looking to incorporate any sort of form or questionnaire to be used with a transaction, that should be developed in consultation with legal counsel. You should not be developing those forms on your own as a broker unless you're also licensed as an attorney. Secondarily, if you are using any of those types of forms or questionnaires, make sure that you're giving them to every prospective buyer that comes into the property so that you don't run into any fair housing issues. So, I mean, those are really the two biggest issues that I'm seeing, is that people are developing them without legal advice, and they may be selectively presenting them to people, which you want to make sure that if you're going to use it, that you use it with everybody. And the third point I would make actually too is that you should not have a brokerage rule that in every transaction I use this form, because they're not mandatory forms. They're still optional, so you should be having a conversation with your client, your seller, and making sure they understand what it is and they want to use it, because then you're using it at the lawful instruction of your client and you're not mandating the use of a non-mandatory form.
On the health questionnaires, where people might be asking, have you traveled recently, all that stuff, how much information should you be disclosing? Should you, as a buyer agent and buyer, should you be answering honestly? Like, I guess, where's the thinking coming down on what you really have to disclose to a seller before you go see their house?
Sure. So it's not mandatory, obviously. So the buyer has the ability to say, no, I'm not comfortable answering these questions. I don't want to answer these questions. And then the seller has the option to say, well, then I'm not allowing you to view the property, because that's, within their prerogative to limit access. Or they can negotiate something in between. If you are answering any of these questionnaires, if you are filling out any of these forms, they should be done accurately. I wouldn't recommend filling them out with inaccurate information, because that certainly exposes you to some liability. But you don't have to do it. If you're not comfortable, if your buyer's not comfortable doing it, then have that conversation and make sure they understand that may restrict their ability to view that property, but that they're not legally required to provide that information.
On that note, as you're asking questions, as either you get a lead come in, whatever, from a buyer, and your buyer agent talking to them, or even a seller listing agent talking to the buyer agent, what kind of questions should you make sure you avoid in trying to gather, the health of the buyer from the standpoint of fair housing? I know you can run into fair housing issues pretty quickly on some of this stuff. So can you talk through agent what they should be not asking, or where they should stay away from asking?
So, I mean, as far as these questions go, I will say that NAR has a really excellent page with a lot of resources on it that goes through all these types of questions. So if you haven't taken a look at that, I would definitely recommend that you do so. I mean, if you're going to be asking questions, you should keep it really high level as far as what you're asking. Have you traveled outside of the country? I don't even think at this point it's important to ask where they've traveled, because it is so widespread that you want to make sure you say, have you traveled outside of the country within a certain time frame? Or have you experienced any symptoms of respiratory illness? I wouldn't get into specifics just because then you're running up against potentially protected health information. And again, I can't emphasize enough to make sure that if you are asking any of these questions, make sure you ask them to everybody and you aren't making your determinations of who to ask these questions of based on race or ethnicity or any other sort of protected class category, because you're going to quickly run into issues if you do that.
Okay. And then, so as agents have moved a lot very quickly and phenomenally into virtual showings and virtual open houses, I probably a little maybe different answers for each, but I think where it's being lost or where you need to be talking about is consumer agency disclosure, especially in the virtual showing route and the virtual open house route. What are the rules? What is the best practice? Because this is something you and I have talked a lot about the last couple months on site. When you never meet the client face to face, now you're meeting with them virtually. You're showing them. You're talking very specifically about a property virtually, maybe never talking to them face to face. Where are we? What is your best advice on consumer agency disclosure in today's world?
Yeah, so this is something that we have been talking about for a while now, and that we all know the law is never quick to catch up with, especially technology-related type things. So the law currently requires that you present the agency disclosure at your first in-person meeting to discuss a specific property. So what happens if you never meet them in person? The law doesn't really address that situation. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be providing the agency disclosure. So our recommendation as a best practice is that you still present them with the agency disclosure as soon as possible in a transaction if you know that you are discussing a specific property with them. If you're taking somebody on a virtual tour of a property, obviously you should be providing them with that agency disclosure. At the very latest, it should be provided prior to entering into a contract. But our recommendation as a best practice is to do it as soon as possible in the relationship.
All right, and then on some of the restrictions on showings, someone's asked, that they're seeing restrictions where no children should be coming into the property for showings. They've seen that in language. I'm probably guessing you're going to avoid that, saying that, to do that.
I haven't heard that one, but that one makes my skin crawl, so don't do that.
And then, how do you balance the seller's demands? So if your seller says, oh, I want you to hold an open house, or I want you to hold live showings, and maybe you don't feel comfortable or something along those lines, the sellers that want to act normally, because a lot of people are treating this virus very differently from each other, and have very different reactions to it. How do you balance those demands from sellers?
So it's all about communication. You need to be speaking with your clients about what's reasonable to expect under these circumstances and work with them to find something that is mutually agreeable for them. We would never recommend putting yourselves in a situation where you are where you feel unsafe, which certainly this would fall within that category. If your seller's not comfortable wanting to provide showings or open houses, sort of the flip side of that is, again, you have a couple of options as far as providing virtual tours or, allowing buyer agents to come in and do like a live tour with their client. You can really limit the exposure that way. Or if they really don't want anybody in their property, you can always temporarily withdraw that property from the market until this has passed, and they're comfortable once again having members of the public in their property.
But if the seller says, yes, I want you to do live showings and you're not comfortable or something like that, you know, what is your obligations to the seller to continue to do them?
I mean, I would look to what the terms of your contract say, because that's going to be, you know, good guiding source. But again, we wouldn't ever recommend that you put yourself in a situation where you feel unsafe. If they are insisting on having live showings, see if maybe you can refer them to somebody. That's always an option. Somebody else who is more comfortable in that, or if you refer them to somebody else in your office. You could refer them outside entirely. But it's all about open lines of communication. Especially if you are at a higher risk for whatever reason, you know, there's not going to be an obligation for you to place your personal safety on the line to show a property.
Okay. Can you broadly talk about like what your obligations to the seller are in this whole scenario under the MAR listing agreement?
I don't have the language in front of me right now, but if you bear with me, I can pull it up and we can come back to it if you want.
Okay, great. That'd be great. And then I'm also want to ask about home inspectors, appraisers not being let in the house. Whose fault is it if there's not an agreeable solution between them being able to get in to fulfill their duties to you know, you have an accepted offer, you're trying to get the home inspector
right.
in, you get past purchase there, you're trying to do the appraisal, you know, what are we doing with all this deposit money if we just can't get these people in and people just get frustrated with the whole situation and say the deal's done?
Right. So I think that the way the home inspection situation is going to be dealt with is a little bit different than the appraiser situation. So for the home inspection, obviously, again, you want to be looking to your contract and see what the language of your contract is under the inspection contingency. The MAR offer, contract to purchase, says that the buyer shall have the opportunity. That means they have to be given the opportunity to exercise that contingency under the contract. Now, again, we're in a unique situation right now that we might have to get creative in our solutions, but this is one of those situations where that COVID-19 addendum could certainly come into play and allow an extension of time for performance under this if for whatever reason a home inspector can't access the property. Let's say the seller is under quarantine because of exposure or symptoms, and it's unsafe for somebody to be coming into the property. You should be entering into an extension in that circumstance to allow the buyer to exercise their contingency that they're permitted to use through their contract, but in a way that's going to be safe and agreeable for everybody. If you can agree on it, let's say the buyer doesn't want to do an extension, you know, then that's a situation. If the buyer doesn't want to do that, then are they waiving their right to the home inspection if they won't do an inspection, or are they moving forward without that, or are they going to be in breach of the contract? Or, you know, so, you know, these are situations where everyone is going to be a little bit unique, and you're going to want to be working with legal counsel if you really come to an impasse with regard to coming to an agreement. I think, at least from my end, from what I've been hearing with people, most people in the transaction are being reasonable and wanting to work with each other for the most part. Obviously, there are those outlier type situations, but with regard to the appraisal, that's a little bit different because the buyer doesn't necessarily have, again, in the MAR contract, doesn't necessarily have that mandatory language that they're permitted to have an appraiser enter the property. I know some lenders are doing drive-by appraisals. Not all lenders are offering that as an option. So this comes into play under the buyer's financing contingency if, you know, if it's a financed property. So again, you want to look at the language of the contract to determine who has what rights and what in this situation. But if the buyer is unable to get an appraisal, then they're unable to fulfill their financing contingency most likely, and either they can find another lender that will do a drive-by appraisal, or they will be in a situation where they're released from the contract because they're unable to fulfill that financing contingency.
Okay. A couple questions have come in. I wanted to get you. So we talked about the children limitations. One agent asked that they'd like to limit showings to buyers and their agent, meaning to exclude friends or people not involved in the decision making of the transaction. Is that possible to limit the amount of people coming into the house?
Yeah, so I think you can limit the number of people coming into the property. So the situation you run into here is you can limit people who aren't decision makers. So for example, when I bought my house, my father-in-law is really handy. So I brought him along with me to take a look at things. In this situation, it would be reasonable to exclude him from this because he's not buying the property. I am. So to allow me and my agent to access the property is reasonable. But it's also reasonable to exclude him. If it's my husband and me and we have 2 children and obviously we can't have childcare right now, excluding the children, that's part of that protected class. So that's why that's a little bit concerning as far as limiting the children from entering the property. But you can definitely limit non-related, non-decision maker type people.
Okay. And then a lot of people are saying that in like a virtual showing or virtual open house, they are virtual showing, they are saying that they represent the seller verbally. Is that enough of a disclosure? I would still act in these situations. I think it's better than nothing, but I think in these situations it still makes sense to be providing that agency disclosure as soon as possible, just so there's no questions. And that's one of the things is like what you and I've said that we've been talking about, because the Board of Registration Broker Salesforce has just put together a subcommittee to talk about how to present consumer agency disclosure when you never meet that buyer or seller in person. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think we're talking about why you and I kind of laugh about the whole situation, because we've been talking about this for the last several months, to where they created that subcommittee, and then we immediately run into this situation right here. So
right.
Second. And then so those are some of the questions I've had. So I wanted to run, is there anything else from the COVID-19 related stuff that you've been running into a lot that we haven't discussed here, or have we kind of hit the areas where you've been getting a lot of questions on?
You've mostly hit the hot topics. Just, the other thing that I would have you be aware of in this situation is if people are buying the property, sight unseen, based just off of a virtual tour, or having their agent walk through the property on Facebook Live or whatever the situation, whatever technology they're using. If you're representing the buyer and you're doing that virtual tour, make sure to really take the time to describe what you're seeing, because things don't always translate the same way through a camera as they do in person. So if you're walking a person through a property, point out, the quality of workmanship that you're noticing, things along those lines that, again, might not come through in the camera. Sorry, my kids are in the background. You need to get out of here. And size of the rooms is another thing that you really want to make sure that you're pointing out to the buyers. If you're standing in a room and you know that it's important for your buyer to have a king size bed, for example, say, all right, well, a king size bed would fit in here, but it, would be really tight, because they might not have the right spatial relations. Again, ceiling height is another thing. You can point out above the doors how much space there is. Say there's a lot of, give an estimate of what the ceiling height is in those situations. I would also make sure that you're including protectionary language in your contract that makes it clear that the buyer understands, really emphasize that there have not been any representations that they're relying on with regard to anything with the property, that they are buying it based on a virtual viewing. They haven't seen it in person. Again, that language is going to be something you're going to work with an attorney on to make sure that it is the proper language that will protect you as well as your client.
I mean, the best thing for our agents is a lot of our agents have had sight unseen offers by their buyers for a long time, being in different parts of the country and working with their trusted agent but the problem is the agent has gone through the property a lot in the past, right? And now the agent may not even been in the property now.
Right. Yep, that makes sense.
Also, some people are asking, can you sign the agency disclosure form electronically through an e-signature application? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So a couple of things that outside of COVID stuff that I wanted to talk to you about, because we get these questions all the time. You put out a lot of information recently on some stuff. Can you walk us through what bedroom count you should be using for your listings, whether it's field card, septic, the actual number of bedrooms in the house? On the Cape, we get a wide variety of actual bedrooms in a house, field card versus septic, and Board of Health and Regulations.
Yeah, this is a question that I do get a lot on the hotline as well. As far as a discrepancy in the number of bedrooms, our recommendation is whatever sources you're using, use the smallest number that's presented there for the actual listing data. So in the field that you're putting that people are going to search under, let's say the septic is, rated for 3 bedrooms, but you've got a field card that says there's 4 bedrooms. List the property as a 3-bedroom, and then in the remarks of the property description, you can explain the discrepancy and say it's possible 4th bedroom or whatever language you're going to use, but say that it's a possibility that there's a discrepancy here. But from a listing standpoint, you want to make sure to be using the smaller number to avoid any potential claims of misrepresentation.
And what I see a lot on the Cape is perhaps, where you actually have 2 bedrooms in the house, but it's a 3-bedroom septic. And that's where you put 2 and then put 3-bedroom septic in the remarks.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So what else, anything else that on the legal hotline prior to the last 3 weeks were creeping up that may still be a lot of questions from that outside of COVID issues that we've had recently?
I mean, they're all the pretty standard issues we've been getting with regard to escrows, a lot of security deposit questions.
When we talk about deposit questions in light of COVID, that might be a good place to be. On how quickly you have to get it to them under the offered purchase. The difference, and one thing that's always been questioned on the Cape is the different opportunities on the offer about ways deposits are delivered, and then any other deposit related stuff from the COVID issues too, from not being as quick to see other people.
Sure. So as far as deposits go, I know this has been, a question that people have as far as, limiting your in-person interactions. If you're going to be mailing deposit monies, my recommendation is to always do it in some sort of, mailing that requires a signature or at least tracking information so that it just doesn't go into the mailbox and potentially get lost, that you have a record of when it was placed in the mail and when it was delivered to its intended destination. The same rules are going to apply, that as far as when you receive monies related to a transaction, they need to be deposited immediately. Banks are still open. They are still operating primarily through the drive-in window, but you should be making sure to deposit those funds as you would at any other time that you receive those deposits. If a transaction falls through as a result of COVID-19, again, I would look to the language of the contract and determine, whether it was a breach or whether it was a mutual release. Get a signed release before giving those funds to either party in the transaction. You want to make sure that you have that signed release. You want to make sure that you're operating in the same manner that you would despite all of the hiccups that the COVID-19 is causing. It really doesn't change what your obligations are in a transaction, especially as it pertains to the deposit monies, escrows.
Okay. And then a couple updates on things that we had since last Monday's call is that the governor revised his order last week, I believe it was, to kind of make real estate brokerages, real estate services essential. That doesn't really change much other than brokerage offices can open, although we still suggest that they don't open and like that you limit the amount of people there to what you need done and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, we are still recommending that even though real estate is determined to be essential at this point, work remotely as much as possible. If you do need to go into your physical office space, make sure that you're limiting the number of people. Still should be, practicing social distancing, but try to work remotely as much as possible. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Anything else we haven't covered that you guys have been working on? You've been so diligent on everything, on following up. Anything else coming across your plate?
No, I will say just stay tuned that we are working on that short-term rental cancellation addendum. So that has gone out to the MAR Forms Committee for their review. So we hope to have that turned around relatively quickly. If you have questions, concerns, comments, things that you or your members are seeing, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. MAR is still working. We're all remote. We're all working from our houses, but we are still accessible and here to do, what you all need from us. So let us know if there's anything that's missing or coming up in your transactions that we aren't aware of, because we want to make sure that we know about everything.
We had a couple questions come in on security deposits. Can rent be used? Can security deposit on the rental be used to toward the rent under this?
Yeah, so that's actually a really common question that I've been getting more of, particularly as we're now in April and new rents are due. Security deposit can be returned to the tenant at any point during their tenancy, so you can certainly return it to them so that they can use it as their rent if they're otherwise unable to make their monthly payment. Make sure that if you are releasing it, that you do so in writing that documents the date, the amount that it was given to the tenant, and understand that by returning the security deposit now, you are exposing yourself to a certain level of risk at the end of their tenancy, because you no longer have a security deposit to cover any damages to the property. So make sure you're considering all the angles there if you are going to, but you certainly are able to.
All right. A couple questions come in that I'll answer back to them on those as well. But I think they were asking too, but you shouldn't take the security deposit and immediately apply it to rent. You have to give it back to them first.
Yeah, because it's not due to the landlord. So at the end of the tenancy, you can use a security deposit for any unpaid rent, but mid-tenancy, it should be returned to the tenant, and then the tenant should use that to pay the rent. You can do that via written agreement also, but I from a risk management standpoint, I would always make sure that it goes back to them and then is applied towards the rent, just to make sure that you're not finding yourself in a mess with a security deposit violation as well.
Okay. And then, I mean, obviously right now at the state level, they're working on a housing bill that talks about foreclosures, prevent, some delays on foreclosures, delays on evictions. So MAR will obviously have been keeping us updated on that, and your colleagues and everyone is working directly with the legislature on those bills as well.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm hearing going to come up a little bit with the eviction, and I don't want to throw you for a loop if you don't have the answer, no problem. But with the eviction moratorium kind of thing, with the not processed evictions, we have a lot of winter rentals that will become summer rentals. And I see that as a potential problem with the tenants not being able to go anywhere. I think we talked a little bit about this on our Wednesday or a Thursday short-term rental call, but to talk to everyone else about that too, if they're running into that situation.
Yes. So if you've got a holdover, I mean, as Ryan said, the courts are not hearing eviction cases. They're not hearing any cases except for emergency hearing situations. So they're really restricting those situations that you're able to get in front of a judge. Most evictions would not fall into that category. If those tenants are holding over, there's not a whole lot you can do other than ask them nicely to vacate per the terms of your agreement. But even if they're still there, they are obligated to compensate you as per the terms of your agreement for that time. So it would just become, an at-will tenancy at that point rather than a specific term. It would just be a month-to-month. And those terms of their previous lease would carry through for that. So they would still owe you rent. They're not going to get a free ride for staying there.
Okay. Great. Yeah, because that's the difference in there's a moratorium on evictions, but not a moratorium on paying rent. There's a big difference between that.
Exactly.
All right. So thank you very much for today. We're able to get it in right at an hour, which is what we kind of want. If you have suggestions on ideas on others, we obviously the SBA loans were a big thing to try to get people on. The banks are really so busy right now, and each individual person's financial situation is so different. I really think, as we've generically talked about what the loans are available to you and the work NAR, the National Association of Realtors, and the Realtors Political Action Committee, RPAC, did so heavily to make sure independent contractors and sole proprietors were able to access those SBA loans. I really think you should just talk directly to your banking representatives on that, because it's so different. And the mortgage folks are just in a crunch too, going to get them on soon too. There's a lot of misconceptions running out there about FHA loans and a bunch of other things on the lending side right now. So we'll definitely get some of that on in the future as well. And then more information on the rent and mortgage delays on foreclosures and evictions as the state works through their legislative bill right now. Greg, do you have anything else that we have not been able to talk about?
Yeah, just two quick things. First, we did put a call out for, I know it's hard to think of the normal business, but we did put a call out to anyone who has a nominee for any of our annual awards. I think one of the most important opportunities here is to recognize those in our community who are doing the best work for our community. So our Good Neighbor Awards are, I think we're seeing people really step up and shine in moments like this. So take a look at that. And then I've got a personal request. I join with the other local presidents every Monday at 3 o'clock, and I always get asked what the most pressing needs are for our local association. I think the short-term rental addendum came out of our conversation 2 Mondays ago. So every Monday at 3 o'clock, I have that opportunity to talk to MAR leadership. So if you have anything for me, you can obviously send it to Ryan or Marissa and staff, but I'm having that call directly with Kurt, our MAR president, and Teresa, the CEO, and their senior staff every week. So please go ahead and send those things along. And again, I know there's a question right now about the loans and discussion on that. I think what Ryan, I'll reiterate what Ryan is saying. We're efforting to get that information as quickly as humanly possible, but every bank is just figuring out, just like with the unemployment for 1099 contractors, every state is just figuring out what they just got dropped in their laps. it's going to take a little bit of time to get the right answers for that. And we want to lead with, most importantly, the correct information. So keep on sending us your questions. We'll try to direct you to the resources as we find them. And then the second that we can do a call like this, whether we do a pop-up like we did for short-term rentals last week when the governor's orders changed, or whether we stick to our regular Mondays. And I think Katie Clancy put out to us that she'd love to see this continue in some way, shape, or form, even when we return back to whatever our new normal is. I think that's something that we're all taking to heart. And just know that your board of directors, your executive team, and our staff are working really, really hard, keeping business as close to usual as we can. And if there's any way we can provide assistance, we're all here, we're all in this together, and we look forward to taking a deep breath and hopefully at the MAR conference, which registrations just opened up for in Falmouth later in the year, seeing each other and enjoying each other's presence face to face sometime soon. So thank you all for joining us, and keep on sending us the information that we can get answered for you. It helps us feel like we can do a little bit something during this time. So thank you all.
All right. Thank you guys very much. And thank you, everyone. Please continue to reach out with any questions throughout the week. I'm here for you. And as Greg said, please take time to nominate someone for our Good Neighbor Award or Realtor of the Year or our Charles Lockhart Distinguished Service Award winner. We are still want to make sure we're getting nominations in on those by the end of the month for our CCR annual awards. So take good care, and we will be with you next Monday at 10:30 a.m. So thank you very much.